As an attorney, an estate planning elder law attorney in Florida, I see a lot of people who, in general, retire in Florida, go into an assisted living facility, a nursing home, a 55 and older community, something in Florida. People want to retire and live out their lives in Florida for obvious reasons, sun, the warmth, the beaches, all that sort of stuff. But what happens is a lot of times they need caregivers. They're not necessarily, need a full-time aide or anything like that, but they might need somebody just to be able to take care of them at some point in the future, help them out. And typically that's going to be their kids. And a lot of times the kids live in another state or sometimes even another country, depending on the situation. And so 5 things that I think are very important for you if you are the caregiver for somebody, you're the primary contact for them, or if you're the person living in Florida, some things that you should maybe be aware of. So number 1, if you're taking care of this person, or just again their primary contact, you're not necessarily living with them or anything like that, you're in another state, you want to know their medical conditions, you want to know their medical history, you want to know all of those things, because that might be necessary if you have to communicate with the doctors on their behalf or something like that. So I know that can be potentially difficult conversation, more so for the person, for the elderly person, for the aging person, but have that conversation, find out their medical history, what's going on, what type of medicine are they taking, what type of diagnosis have they had, and just be very familiar with those types of things. Number 2, have some sort of filing system for all of their important documents, right? You want to have something in place, their social security cards, their insurance policies, other important documents, bank statements, basically all of those important documents that you may need at some point. Have those in place, right? Because you may need those. You may need to have access to those, and for whatever it's worth, you're probably gonna have a hard time going to find those documents at a person's house, right? Especially if they're in their 80s and 90s, having accumulated a lifetime of stuff. Most people's homes do not have, a filing cabinet with everything neatly organized. You'll be searching for days trying to find those documents. So have some sort of filing system on your own of all of those important documents. Along those same lines, create copies of any of those important documents, right? You want to have access to the originals. Ideally, you know where they are. Depending on the documents, the family member may just keep those originals, and that might be what we would suggest anyways, but know where the originals are, and you should have some sort of copies of them. You should have copies of those documents. So again, kind of along the lines of creating a filing system, make sure that you know where everything is at. Make sure that you have all of those things, the power of attorney, the healthcare surrogate, the living will, maybe even copies of the trust, copies of the last will and testament. Again, copies of all of those important things. Make sure that you have access to them. Number 4, investigate care providers in the area. Build some sort of relationship with them. Especially again, depending on if you're out of state, depending on how long this loved one's been in Florida, they might not even know where the nearest hospital is, right? They may not even know where to go. You may not know where they need to go. So be familiar with the hospitals, be familiar with the care providers, all different types of things, from physical therapy, your cardiologist, all different types of things. Obviously, you're gonna need more care, most likely as you age. So just make sure you have contacts of that, and probably have relationships with that, and maybe even have like a cheat sheet contact form with all of those providers, so that you know who they are and they know where they are. And then lastly, plan for any sort of emergencies. Right now, it probably doesn't make sense necessarily to keep your car gassed all the time so that you can, drive down and overnight, but just have some contingency plans in place, right? Is there somebody in the area that is close by that you trust that could go check on mom or dad if you're unable to get down there, if an emergency happens? Or maybe you have contacts with a driver who could come and pick mom and dad up from the house if necessary, right? What do you need to do? Maybe you do need to have a bag packed and ready to go in case you have to fly down or drive down there. So just plan for the worst, be prepared for all of that. It can't hurt, it can only help. So there are some additional considerations to care for and to think about if you are caring for a loved one and you lived out of state, but it is certainly not impossible. It is very doable. I'd say probably the majority of Floridians who come down here have loved ones that live in the other states as well. So it can definitely be done.